Yeah, and I look at the way that the MSP space has evolved to over the last few years in terms of kind of being required to look at a broader and broader and broader remit. It ultimately comes down to capacity and capability. And this is where it's interesting, and we can discuss later how that's expanded into the services procurement world as well. But ultimately, organizations are wrestling with the problem of how do they get stuff done. And, you know, you guys are trying to help them solve that problem.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about kind of where things are now, because I know with how you're envisioning the future of the MSP, that's something that's really developing at a pace. I've heard you talk about the Agentic MSP. Do you want to just talk a little bit about what that is and what your kind of vision is for this Agentic MSP model?
Yeah. So I'm not the expert here, but I do have a vision. And I'm really lucky that I've got brilliant people within the business that can then take that vision and use their expertise. So if I clunk my way through this, and Christian and my team, if you are watching, I apologise. But the vision is really clear. You know, with the advent and speed at which AI is having an impact on our lives and the ability to do things perhaps better and perhaps faster. I say perhaps because I do believe that there will be humans within the business. Humans play a significant role as part of the process. But I believe that moving to an agentic MSP is the future of MSP. Now, anybody that knows me will have heard me over the last 10 years speak about our industry having not evolved.
Right.
You know, you look at an MSP 25 years ago and you look at an MSP today, there's really not a great deal of difference. It's a blend of technology, people and process. That's it. Now, that's not going to change, but the way in which technology is leveraged to change the experience, I think, is really important. When you look at the HR tech landscape, including MSP, VMS, ATS, procurement technologies, procurement from a PO perspective, finance approval, all of these things somebody can be dealing with upwards of 25 different technology engagements on a daily basis. You then start throwing in expenses and travel and, you know, how you do your work, then that becomes really overwhelming from a technology perspective. I'm of the belief that we can, and know we can because we're in that space now, change the experience for the customer to get to a native experience for them. Use your operating system that is your native system within your business today. If you're a Microsoft user, then we should be able to deliver our service through Teams, through Copilot, without the need for you to have to interact with multiple technologies behind the scenes. And, you know, I think the deployment of agents within that process will give a much enhanced user experience, so long as it is bookended, dovetailed, whatever the right terminology is, with humans, because I don't want to lose the human component. I have 1,011 employees today, it might be 1,012 today, at Pontoon. The introduction of AI is not going to mean any of those people lose their jobs. What it does mean is I can double, if not treble, and quadruple the spend under management and the service that we deliver to customers around the world without having to double and triple and quadruple the headcount in the business to service that. It also means that there are opportunities for people within our business today to learn an entirely new job. You take the IKEA story of 8,000 customer services representatives that were replaced with an AI solution. Those people didn't lose their jobs. AI didn't impact their income. But what IKEA recognised is you had a huge volume of people that knew their catalogue better than anybody else. So they repurposed and gave an alternative opportunity to those people to deliver a different role. And that created, I think, over €1 billion of additional revenue. So 8,000 people didn't lose their jobs. And I might be getting my numbers wrong, by the way. Apologies if I'm wrong. It might not be 8,000 and it might not be 1 billion, but the story is as it was. Same with other organisations, and we're going to be no different. So I'm in a place where, going back to your earlier comments, failure isn't an option. I am of the belief that an agentic solution is the evolution of MSP. And as I say, I've been saying for 10 years, get a grenade, throw it in the middle of MSP, blow this thing up, because it's an antiquated model. But whenever you do that, you set a challenge to a customer that is used to a particular commercial model, typically a supply chain managed or supply chain funded model that pays for it, net zeros out the cost to the customer. If you try and change the way in which it happens and the customer buying journey isn't aligned to that change, it then becomes very difficult. Many of our VMS providers tried to change to licensing fees and move away from the percentage of spend commercial methodology. It's been really hard to move away from that because the client keeps pulling it back to, no, we want supplier funded and this is the only way we want to see it happen. So at some point with an agentic service, we're going to have this SaaS component and the service component. How do we bring that together with a better commercial modelling that supports supply chain? Suppliers have been squeezed over time and continue to see their margins erode, with MSP fees and service fees then coming to them to fund these solutions. It then becomes more margin erosion. And, I think there's space for everybody to do well. There's space for the client to save money. There's space for the MSP to not be seen as a not-for-profit organisation. And there's space for supply chain to do very well. And I say supply chain, not just staffing providers, because, of course, a huge part of what we're doing is very much outcome-based. So we're talking about service providers, professional services, and outcome delivery is more and more prevalent, in fact, over and above staffing, which you know.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because what this requires is a greater understanding and recognition of value within the client organisations, which again comes back to what you were talking about earlier, data, insights, predictive analytics, that sort of thing, because the more sophisticated the buyer is in understanding the opportunity, the more they can see the value that they're getting, the savings that they can make. And what we're talking about here are, the traditional kind of MSP, contingent workforce only. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of people involved in the process. There's multiple agencies. There's lots of things happening in a fairly complicated process. So by bringing in effective process, governance, supported by technology, that's just making everyone's jobs easier to do and making the whole thing more efficient. When you start expanding that out into the services procurement supply chain as well, you've suddenly got a supplier looks different. What the supplier interface looks like is totally different. And actually, supplier sourcing and selection is then very important. Whereas on the contingent workforce side, the agency suppliers, the staffing suppliers are taking care of that. But suddenly it's now direct to the MSP to sort that out. So I think it's really interesting to look at how that's changed over time. And I think, more and more organisations are starting to get a better understanding of value. And I think that's a procurement-wide legacy issue where it's just cost has always been the thing that they're addressing rather than value. And that is something that procurement have been talking about changing for a long period of time. This is where things like AI are making a massive difference to hurdles like that traditionally existed. It's too difficult to calculate that. Well, do you know what? It's not anymore. That excuse is gone. And I think the other thing that, just to touch on what you were saying there around user experience, I think that's a very good insight. That's exactly the way that we as a technology company view AI, where the value is. It's user experience. On all sides, it's making the process easier. Yeah. It's stripping out the annoying stuff that shouldn't be there, that you shouldn't have to worry about, so that the human in the loop can then do the important thinking and they can do the relationships and they can manage that. And if you look at supply chain, whether it's staffing suppliers with contractors and temps coming into the business, or whether it's professional services, IT services, facilities, engineering services, etc., those services suppliers or those staffing companies, the relationships need to be good. So by rating the whole experience for everybody, it allows there to be more focus on that, those relationships, which is critical when there is more and more competition for the skills that are required and the capabilities that are required, because everything's just moving so quickly, particularly in technology.